Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Conversations. It is my great pleasure today to have with us Miguel Santana, the new CEO of the Weingart Foundation. Miguel, thanks so much for joining us, and congratulations on your new gig. I know it's been a while, but what a wonderful thing for you, and what a wonderful thing for our community.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to be part of this inaugural podcast. It's been a great 6 months. You know, I started the same time as our president started in his inauguration. So his benchmarks are also mine. And, you know, fortunately for me, even though I started during COVID, I did know the board of the Weingart Foundation. I served on the board for 4 years and the staff. So I know what the people look like behind the screens, behind the TV monitors, but it's been going really well.
And your board chair is one of my favorite people in the world, Eileen Adams.
I hear that often. She's also one of my favorite people.
Yeah, she's pretty special. And it's a great team. Well, you know, I having been in the biz for over 20 years at Wells Fargo running the foundation, I was so happy to find out that you were chosen to lead this organization, because you have the experience, you have the perspective, you have the relationships in our community. And I've read, you know, some of your comments and some of the thoughts you've shared regarding the urgent issues facing our city right now. I personally feel that Los Angeles, I think our nation's is at a crossroads, has been at a crossroads. I'm seeing things that I've never seen before. And I'd love you to comment a little about that. You mentioned President Biden. You've both started at the same time. Are you optimistic, Miguel, or do you think we have some more tough days ahead?
I think we have a lot of tough days ahead, but I actually am optimistic. You know, in many ways, the systems that were developed in the course of the last 100 years are really being tested and challenged. And if COVID taught us anything, is that this is the time to really look critically at those systems. I was part of endorsing, enabling, and supporting those systems through most of my career. We should really take a step back and ask ourselves, what is fundamentally not working? Give ourselves the freedom and the imagination to recreate these systems, and really use this crisis as an opportunity to pivot to something that really deals with the real issues facing our community.
I couldn't agree with you more. And you know, I think that we all experienced the horror of the George Floyd event, which I think was another pivotal event in all of our lives, and the racial reckoning that has brought about. And I'd love you to comment on that a little bit, because, you know, we've all believed for so many years that, you know, America is land of equal opportunity and fairness and equity, and we've really found that it is not in many respects, and particularly for communities of color, African Americans. And I think there's a heightened role that we all need to play to improve that situation. And I wonder if you might comment about that a little bit too.
Well, I think that's what I meant by really taking a step back. You know, when you think about even Los Angeles and how it was formed and developed, it was designed around systems that marginalize some communities while benefiting others. You know, people were told where they could live, what kind of jobs they could have, their public safety, the way they engage with law enforcement was often defined by their skin tone or background or their zip code. And I think COVID-19 really exposed how those things exist. Certainly the murder of George Floyd was a real stark, harsh reality test for all of us. And so, you know, the good news is that we don't have to maintain it. We don't have to continue supporting these broken systems. But it starts by being honest. It starts by recognizing that the principles and the foundation of this country, of this city, of this region, was designed not in an equitable fashion, but rather designed really to create the inequities that we have today. And then from there, from that acknowledgement, we could move forward and really reimagine something new. But we have to be honest about that.
You know, it reminds me of the first house I bought in Pasadena. It was over on the east side of the Arroyo, and there's a wonderful neighbor next door. I hope she's still living. She was quite elderly, who was of Japanese background. And she and her husband, who I've met as well, had met at Manzanar. And when they finally got out, one of the few places in Los Angeles, Southern California, where they could purchase a home was right next to this little house I'd bought. And she told me the whole story. And I was incredulous at the time to think that ever happened, but it wasn't that long ago. And the remnants and the challenges of that remain. I'll never forget her. She was lovely. I want to ask you about the issue of homelessness, because boy, it's sure been in the news a lot lately. And I grew up here, Miguel, and I remember seeing the occasional homeless person, or my dad used to call them the bums or the town drunk. I was driving downtown the other day, and I was near the 101 freeway, and I was shocked at the encampments that I saw. And then I had to go down the Flower Mart, and it's just, it is stunning what is down at Wall Street near, Skid Row, as they call it. How do you think it became so bad is my first question. And have our elected officials and systems and institutions failed us? Because I think is at a crisis point right now.
Well, I think homelessness has now become so synonymous with Los Angeles that is as constant as the weather and traffic. No matter what part of the city you live in, it is impossible not to have this issue as part of your daily life, going to the supermarket, going to the gym, taking your kids to school. It's impossible to ignore. And I think the way we got here is because for a long time, for generations, we ignored it. Our policy as a region was to contain it, to basically create, manufacture Skid Row, focus all the services in that area, with the hope that if we created a boundary around a part of town where people were able to live, and as individuals experiencing homelessness, that somehow the rest of us, our responsibility goes away. Well, clearly that strategy failed. The strategy of containment has been is really one that, as all of us, should be ashamed of. Again, grounded in sort of racist policies that really made it harder for people of color to buy homes and settle in certain parts of the city. But in many ways, homelessness is the most tangible manifestation of the systemic failure throughout Southern California. And obviously, it's not unique to LA. It's impossible to go to any major city, certainly any city on the West Coast, and not see it. But we are ground zero. We have the largest unhoused population anywhere else in the country, and it really is all of our responsibility. We all share not only the blame but the responsibility for how it is today.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I it's very interesting your comment about containment. You're absolutely right. You had a handful of missions: the Fred Jordan mission, the Union Rescue mission, the LA mission, and that was sort of the dumping ground and where you would contain the problem. But it's everywhere now. I was talking to, I'm sure, a mutual friend, Matt Toledo, former publisher of the LA Business Journal. He and his wife moved from their home in Venice to another part of Southern California. For no other reason, the homeless problem became intolerable. And it's certainly been in the news recently about the issues along the boardwalk and the the tete-a-tete between Sheriff Villanueva and Councilmember Mike Bonin, and those who are advocating a radical, aggressive, hardcore crackdown and relocation, and those who are trying to find more, I think, humane and sustainable solutions. And I wonder if you might comment about that. How do we balance what I really think is this heartbreaking humanity of the homeless plight? It is heartbreaking, and it's hard to see it as I've never experienced it. But we also need safe neighborhoods, and people need to be able to function and live their lives. What do you think? What do you think of all that? Where do you think that's going to land?
Well, I think the real issue here is that despite the unprecedented investment that the region has put into solving this problem, everyone in elected office, in the nonprofit sector, is doing what they can to solve it. That despite of all of that attention, all of that focus, all of those resources, the problem appears to be getting worse. And I would argue the reason that is that we've created a system of workarounds, a system of freelancing where everybody, tries to do the best thing they can within their own community, within their own sphere of influence. But we haven't really created a system. There isn't currently a comprehensive response to this crisis. There's an approach in Venice and an approach in Echo Park, driven by each council member. Each supervisor may have her point of view on how to deal with this, but no one's frankly in charge of this issue holistically. And when you look at all of the other issues that we share in common, whether it's air quality or transportation, education, public safety, fire response, emergency response, we would never create a system where nobody was in charge, where no one ultimately had the ability to direct outcomes, to leverage resources, to act as a cheerleader in Sacramento and in Washington, asking for the region's share of resources. We have competing strategies, competing perspectives, all because people, I think, intend to do well. They're all trying to get to a positive outcome, but there isn't the kind of cohesion that you see in virtually in every other issue that government deals with.
It's actually a really good point. I can remember when I was with the foundation, I would receive so many proposals from different organizations doing different things to help the homeless situation. And I thought to myself, my gosh, if I was homeless and needed to access all these things, I'd be running around literally trying to, go from one place to the next. I agree. There should probably be a homeless czar and the bringing together of all these different services. That'd be a good start. Certainly. Well, I wanted to ask you also, Miguel, because I think COVID has been such an earth-shaking event for the nonprofit sector, for the philanthropic community. It had already begun to change, certainly since I began in the business in the early 90s, with the exodus of so many corporations, with a lot of the old guard moving on. We recently lost Eli Broad. A lot of the leaders of philanthropy have moved on. So many companies leaving the area or refocusing their giving, significantly reducing or redirecting their giving. What advice or direction or guidance or encouragement would you provide to nonprofits right now that are struggling, frankly, to survive? Most especially coming out of the pandemic, although I worry that we're entering pandemic part 2. Seemingly this virus is being re-energized. But what would you say to folks in the sector right now? Because there's a lot of fear. The demand for services has gone through the roof. I know funding has increased this last year because of COVID, but a lot of places are struggling.
So, I spent the last 6 months meeting with our grantees around the region, from the Inland Empire to the Antelope Valley, the East Side, the South LA, the San Fernando Valley, Orange County. And one thing was very clear, that our nonprofits were really tested during this period of time. Many had to pivot their work so that they could focus on issues of subsistence, because families and individuals were facing personal crisis that suddenly, they may be about education, but they had to focus on getting people fed.
Right.
They've had a pivot in responding to advocating for more testing and the equitable distribution of vaccinations. So people are tired, they're exhausted. This is a crisis that impacted you in every way: your work, your own body, your life, your family. And so I think the Weingart Foundation has been very supportive of the nonprofit sector, really to meet them where they're at and to listen very carefully as to what they need to be able not only to survive during a moment like this, but also sort of develop a strategy for the next few years. So we're one of the few foundations that actually provide unrestricted support to keep the lights on, to help build financial systems, to help build strategic planning, because we are in the business of supporting the nonprofit sector. We believe it's an important part of our community, and in many ways fills in the gaps that the inequities have created. So my advice to the nonprofit sector is to take a step back, really think about, assess your assets, and determine where can we move forward from here. What have we learned from this crisis? How did we survive this stress test, real life stress test? And then really think strategically about the next few years. What are your individual communities going to have, need, and require? The other thing that I think has been very impressive is to see the collaborations and the different kinds of efforts that have been surfacing throughout the region of really nonprofit leaders combating some of the systemic issues within their own communities. There's a recognition that the nonprofit sector can meet a gap, but if you work together, you could actually demand better accountability from government so that there is no gap, that the government actually fills in that gap, and which allows the nonprofit sector to move on to something else. And so this is happening all over the region, in areas that you wouldn't think, like in Orange County and in the Inland Empire and the Antelope Valley. And I think as funders, we should be supportive of those kinds of collaborations. We should support the leadership in those areas. We should encourage collective action and strategic thinking for the long term. That's something that I would encourage the nonprofit to do and sector, and then funders to do.
It's interesting. I for many years, nonprofit leaders would ask me, how do you feel about partnerships? And I would say, I love partnerships. And if anyone ever brought me a proposal that included a partnership, I'd love to fund it, because they were rare. So many organizations were siloed, I think, and competitive and wary about, sharing resources or donors or relationships. And I think COVID made that necessary. And I agree. I've seen more of that, and it really pleases me. I think that some good learnings will come out of this. I also have to ask you, on behalf of all the folks in development out there, I'll bet your phone and your program officers' phones ring off the hooks. It was not uncommon when I was at Wells Fargo, Miguel, truly, to receive 50, 75 calls a day. I tabulated the number of proposals that I reviewed in my career. It was generally between 3,000 and 4,000 requests annually. I don't know how I did it. Somehow I got through it. What advice or guidance would you provide to any organization that is seeking support from the Weingart Foundation? You're running one of the biggest shops in town. You have such a visibility, and there's such great need out there.
Well, I'm fortunate in that, there's a great team in place. We have program officers and an executive team that is very good at what they do. They really try to be responsive. They try to turn things around quickly so that we're not creating barriers. We really try to simplify processes. But the best advice is to really watch carefully and sort of think about how our purpose, our mission really aligns with yours. We're a private foundation that has a benefit of being very intentional. We focus on three big things. One is we believe in the nonprofit sector, and we're supportive of keeping it thriving. And so we're the place that you come to if you need a strategic plan within your organization, regardless of the kind of services that you provide. We focus on marginalized communities that have often been left out, and in meeting sort of the broken and inequitable systems that exist. We support collaborations, collective action efforts to help communities come together to respond to a specific issue. And we also support efforts that are sort of an ecosystem. So it's like, for example, we've invested quite a bit in Southeast LA County, where I'm from, in the hub cities, as they're called, in helping build an infrastructure of community-based organizations and local leadership, versus the east side of Los Angeles that has a very robust system already has been developed over many years. So we support those kinds of ecosystems as folks come together. So I would, if you're looking for funding, study carefully how we look at these issues, and see whether it's a good match. We also care a lot about how, not only the work that you do, but we care how you do it. We care that your executive team looks like the community that you're trying to assist, that you have ways of incorporating folks' lived experience in your program work. So the how you do it is as important as what you do.
I love what you said about representation. I'm sure you saw the story in the Los Angeles Times last month where they surveyed 20 boards in Los Angeles, and there was just a paucity of African Americans and people of color. And I think that really needs to change. And I've certainly been talking about that for a long time and said that organizations need to create those opportunities, not just in their leadership, but in their governance. I think it's a very, very important thing. And, I'd also just want to say, for many years, I learned a lot from Fred Ali. I learned a lot from the Weingart Foundation and the work that you did. We collaborated on some things when I was at the bank. I guess the most trouble Miguel ever got into is I was speaking to a group of nonprofits and someone raised their hand and said, "How do you get a grant from the Wells Fargo Foundation?" And with a perfectly straight face, I said, 2 ways: See's Candy or Johnny Walker Red Label. Thank God they laughed and they weren't recording it. We weren't quite as sophisticated sometimes, but just awesome work. I just want to ask you too about leadership, Miguel. I've had some great bosses in my career. I've had some who are not so great. How would you describe your leadership style, and what, in your estimation, makes a great leader? You have had an incredibly distinguished, accomplished career, Miguel. You have led large, complex organizations with hundreds of employees, and that's not easy. But you've done so with remarkable, uncommon success consistently. So how do you do it? How do you navigate the politics? What makes a great leader?
I think of leadership not as a person, but as a thing that you do. So I don't think there's oftentimes people attribute a title to being a leader. I actually think that titles many times make it hard to lead. For me, leadership is really about being steadfast on the mission and purpose of the organization that you're part of, or the work that you're doing. And then really reminding folks that the most important thing is to be protective of that work, of what we care about the most, what is our intention, and then being honest about listening carefully to dissenting voices who may say, you really had gone away from what you were about originally, and taking the grains of truth that come from that, and moving people with you at a pace that is challenging, but at the same time is getting to progress. And so whether I was at the city or the county during, the worst financial crisis that we confronted, or,
yes.
Being at Fairplex that needed to really focus on its mission and purpose and design an entire system around that. I think what for me leadership is being clear as to what the center of the work is, what the mission is, and then moving all the pieces forward, both above you at a board level or at a governance level, and then of course a broader community. So it is not making it about you, but frankly making it about the work that lies ahead. And I think sometimes that means you have to raise hard questions. Sometimes you have to expose hidden issues that people haven't been talking about. But I think if you're very clear as to what the work is, then it's in many ways that is protects you from the role that sometimes you have to play.
It's great advice. It's great thinking. Thank you for that. I think I'll send you my resume. No, I love it. It's great. It's great stuff, Miguel. It really is. And my last question to you. We're coming up on 30 minutes. As a Southern California boy like myself, you grew up in Bell Gardens. I grew up Midtown LA. I always love to ask, what do you love about Los Angeles, and what does Miguel Santana's family do for fun? We work so hard. We spend so many hours in our jobs, and jobs sort of become us. They become our identity. It did for me for many years. So what do you love about this great city, and what do you do for fun?
I am a native Angelino. I've been here most of my life. I'm married to a native Angelino. I pre-COVID, I spent a great weekend for me was exploring the city from the perspective of my adult children. So, I have 4 millennial daughters. 3 of them live here, and they know places in LA that I never knew existed. They introduced me to art, to food, to neighborhoods that a Gen Xer like me wasn't aware of. And so I loved exploring the city from their perspective, and really embracing what the LA that's emerging. That's very different from the LA that I know. During COVID, we live here in the community of West Adams. We have a 100-year-old house that we've been restoring for the course of the last few years in this phenomenal neighborhood with a lot of history, very diverse. And so for me, I have become a little bit of a homebody. I really like being home. I like walking my neighborhood and exploring great places here. We found this great place called the Plant Chica down the street on Jefferson that's owned by a family that grew up here and started their own plant store next to a coffee place that, again, is young people from this community. So for me, it's really those simple things that I really enjoy, hearing people's story of LA, and really exploring the parts of LA that you don't see on TV, the parts that are the real parts of this community. I still think we live in the best place in the world. I can't imagine living anywhere else. Despite all of our problems and challenges, I still think LA's best days are still ahead of us.
You spoke for me too, because I can't think of a more fun weekend when Raimundo and I get in the car and just drive around and find something that looks interesting and stop and pull over and the rich diversity of our community is so gratifying and so wonderful to experience. And it's a remarkable story, Los Angeles. 120 years ago, I think our population was less than 500,000. And look what's happened in such a comparatively short time. Well, Miguel, the last thing I'm just going to say is there as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience, with our listeners? You've been so kind to spend this time with us today. And I just can't thank you enough. So any last thoughts?
I think the only last thought I have is that, it's very clear, Angelinos are frustrated with the way things are today, and are hoping for a savior to come in and sort of find the panacea moving us forward. Well, there's no such thing. We are each responsible. We each have a role to play. We each have a way that we could be part of the solution and not just sit on the sidelines and complain, hoping that somebody takes care of it. And so I encourage all of your listeners to ask themselves, in what way can I support this community to make it the kind of community I want to live in, and my children and my friends and my family. We all have that collective responsibility in big ways and small ways. So, I think it's a time to reflect on what role we play, each and every one of us. And I encourage folks to roll up their sleeves and find their ways to make LA a better place.
Beautifully said. Well, Miguel Santana, thank you so much for joining us today on Community Conversations. A great honor to have you with us and you hear your wonderful thoughts, and every good wish and every success to you in your new role, relatively new role at the Weingart Foundation. Los Angeles is lucky to have you. I think it's accurate to say that you're one of the treasures of Los Angeles, Miguel. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you so much for bringing us together in the way that you are.
Well, we'll see how it goes. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll have you back too. We're just getting started. Thank you, Miguel, so much.